Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. On this Shabbat, where we find ourselves right smack in the middle of the book of Leviticus, talking about all of the priestly laws and moral code, I want to do something a little unconventional, and I want to take us back to the book of Genesis. I don't want to look at Leviticus today. I want to look at two stories in the book of Leviticus, in the book of Genesis rather, and ask us, how did we get there? The first story is from the second parsha of all of the Torah, Parshat Noach. And God declares that there will be a big flood on the land. And the reason why is because people are acting in a way that is not consonant with the values that God had hoped for. And the only one who was worthy of saving, besides the animals, of course, that we don't hold up to a value or moral code, the only one was Noah and his family. He was considered in that time to be the most worthy. So God saved him in the ark with all the animals. And then, just a parsha later, we learn about a town that was utterly destroyed called Sodom. And it was destroyed because, most would believe, of immoral and licentious behavior. It basically told us early on in the code of the Torah that if we cannot choose a path that is moral and good and right, that God will wreak havoc on the world in which we live in. For me, I always found that to be an interesting and powerful and encouraging biblical story. But lately, I'm starting to wonder whether we are living in a world that would require God to do what God did for Noah and in Sodom v'Amorah. It's not like our moral code is off a little bit. It is not like there are some factors that we're just missing a little bit of rhythm on. But there are things happening today in our world that are absolutely nonsensical and illogical and are devoid of ethics and of morality. For me, in the social scientist that I have studied to be and tried to be in my rabbinate, it is my nature to try and get to the core of what causes this immorality in our world. I always try and understand what is the root cause of what's happening. Were I an oncologist, I would be much more interested in the cause of cancer than in treating the cancer. And as I have been unpacking this issue, especially intensely, over the last months in particular, I have come to the conclusion that morality is more a result of what is broken in our world. It is more a result of the cancer than the cause of the cancer. And I'd like to give you a brief analogy of what I mean by that. If I were to ask most of you, what's the difference between an Orthodox Jew and a Reformed Jew? The majority of you would say, well, Orthodox Jews are very particular in the way they practice law. They won't drive on the Jewish Sabbath, and they keep strictly kosher. And Reformed Jews, they're not so strict about kosher, and they're not so strict about what they do and don't do on Shabbat. And while that's 100% accurate, that is not the core of what causes that. You see, that is the reaction. But what causes the difference between Reform Judaism and Orthodox Judaism is a difference in theology. The way that Orthodox people think about their relationship with God and their responsibility to God is radically different than the way Reformed people think about their relationship with God and their responsibility to God. And because they think of it differently, the result is different. But most of us just see that the behavior is different, and we don't think about the core driver. And the core driver that makes a differential between any of the streams of Judaism has to do with theology. So I share that with you because I think morality is the result of what I have been davening on for the last 18 months and 6 months intensely as to what is going wrong with our society. And in particular, what I see as one of the major manifestations of something wrong with our society is what has happened on the college campuses of late. Of course, I could come up with 50 different reasons as to what's happening on the college campus and why. Every generation wants a Vietnam and a Kent State. Every generation wants to feel good about themselves. Every generation wants to be passionate about a cause, or those that look or feel or are oppressed or deserving less. Whatever it is, we can unpack that, but I want to get to the core of what is causing people to stand in support of a terrorist organization on a college campus. Educated people, thoughtful people, people brought up with morality, who then mask their face and celebrate the rape of women and the abduction of children. What causes that? What is it from? I couldn't wrap my hands around it, not for lack of trying. You know, when I watched in New York City, all of these people going up to these posters, signs, and flagpoles, and throughout Central Park, and ripping down the kidnapped signs of Israelis who were taken captive by Hamas, I didn't understand why they were doing that. Clearly, there's video of this woman or this baby being taken as a captive over to Gaza. There's video that's been shared that they're being held hostage, and there are others who are ripping it down. And I wrestled with that too, and then I came to a conclusion as to why it happened. And you could bring a hurricane wind, you're not going to move me from this conclusion. The conclusion is, in my estimation, that people thought if we leave those signs up, then no one could have any reaction whatsoever but a feeling of victimhood for those Israelis and the Jewish people who are connected to Israel. And if we admit victimhood for Jewish people and Israelis, well, then we are inherently denying victimhood for Gazans and Palestinians, which frankly is ridiculous. So by taking it down, you don't have to get into a victimhood war. And we deny the victimhood of Jews and Israelis and only allow for one narrative of victimhood. So I came to a conclusion on that. I thought about it, I wrestled with it, I read about it, I thought in detail. And I am almost at a similar place of conclusion as to what is happening with the moral fabric of our world today. But to be honest with you, I'm not as sure-footed as I am about those kidnap signs or other things, because I'm still in that process. But I'm slowly digging my heels in. The reason why I think there is the result of a lack of morality in our world today is because we have had a national divorce from honesty and from truth. I want to share two examples with you. One that's almost trivial and comical, but really not. And one that has caused me physical pain over the last week. The first one is from the governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem, who was on a book tour over the last 10 days for her book that is about to be released called No Going Back. And in the book, she put a whole bunch of things, and one of them in particular that she wrote was about her encounter in meeting Kim Jong-un, the dictator from North Korea. and that, of course, she stared him down and that she wasn't afraid of him. She even read this piece of her book into her audiobook, and then when she was pressed about the meeting, which clearly didn't happen, she removed it from her book. She went on all of the talk shows because she was on the short list to be a vice presidential candidate in the Republican Party. And I watched every single one of them because it was like a YouTube where you're just watching a train wreck over and over and over. And there was something somewhat satisfying in its stupidity. And every single person, even from right-wing or left-wing media, asked her the same kinds of questions, and she could not say, "It didn't happen. I shouldn't have written it. It wasn't true. I had dreamt of it. I fantasized about it. I thought if I put it in, it would give me more credibility in the roles and growth that I seek." But she couldn't do it. She danced and she twisted and all of this malarkey and baloney instead of just owning it. And every single person watched her lying to all of the viewers over and over and over again. And we seem to have allowed this notion that we can traffic in lies. The second example I give is much harder for me to share, but must be shared. It's harder for me to share because of all of you who know me well and have watched me from this bema over 20 years and know my morals and my values and inherently my politics. But I am so angry, I am so hurt, and I am so betrayed by the actions of the President of the United States this past week that my blood has boiled and I literally cannot sleep. When President Biden gave a speech this week on the eve after Holocaust Memorial Day and spoke full-throatedly and masterfully about the rise in anti-Semitism and the dangers it brings to this world. And he said, for those who think the Holocaust was 75 years ago, you're wrong, it was 7 months ago, referring to October 7th, and demanding that we stop Jew hatred. I sighed. I had a small release valve come off. Whew. Finally, after staying so silent on these campuses and so many other things that are happening, finally, leadership is saying what needs to be said. And then 24 hours later, publicly, not in back channels, proudly, the same President of the United States said that he is going to withhold bombs and munitions to Israel because he is afraid it will be used as a form of genocide. And even the State Department claimed to the United Nations this week, the State Department run under the Biden administration, that there might be reason, listen to my words, I'm quoting directly, there might be reason to suspect that Israel has committed genocide, although there is absolutely no proof of it to date. There might be reason to suspect that I stole $1 million, but there's no proof of it to date. There might be reason to suspect that I'm going to lose 60 pounds in the next 2 weeks, but there's no proof of it to date. This bothered me on so many levels. It bothered me in the idea that the inmates are clearly running the asylum. It bothered me on the idea that we are taking people who are making false claims and giving it legitimacy simply because it's loud, not because it's right. And it bothered me most of all because of the thick and painful hypocrisy of 24 hours before talking about the reality of the rise in Jew hatred and anti-Semitism, and then to give in to the critics within 24 hours publicly and say, Israel cannot be trusted with these weapons. Israel might be liable for war crimes. Let me tell you a group that is absolutely not liable for war crimes. Do you know one? I don't know any country that's been involved in war that we couldn't put that microscope under, because war is nasty and dangerous and terrible things happen in war. But I do know a country that is 100% responsible for war crimes, or at least a people or a group, and they're called Hamas. I also know about a country that has given billions of dollars of aid to UNRWA, the United Nations, the Palestinian Authority, and that money has been absconded, that money has been embezzled, that money has been stolen, and those monies that were given to build infrastructure were made into tunnels, and the monies that were used to build lighting were cut down into light poles and used for crude missiles that landed all over Sderot. And I don't hear on college campuses people asking for a divestment from investments in UNRWA, or a divestment and giving material aid to the Palestinians. I don't hear a condemnation of those that abducted and stole and raped 254 souls, many of whom are American. And all of this is because of a thick hypocrisy. And ladies and gentlemen, hypocrisy is the sibling of untruth, of falsehood, of dishonesty. It's not a distant relative. It is connected in DNA. It has the same parents. And that is why we are continually looking at these moments of hypocrisy, and we have to call them out. We have to. Because I have claimed for years from this bima, and I've never felt it more passionately than I do at this moment, that we cannot survive in a post-truth world. We Jews, we part of the 21st century, we part of a free society. To live in post-truth is tantamount to removing oxygen. You can only breathe a little bit and for a little while, but eventually you'll be gasping and you will be suffocated, and I will be too. That's what living without truth and honesty is. A handful of years ago, there was a moment in the Miss America pageant, and Steve Harvey was given an envelope that was down to 2 candidates, and Steve Harvey erroneously announced the wrong person as being the crown of Miss America. Within seconds, Steve Harvey realized his mistake, and he stood in front of everyone, he grabbed the microphone, and he said, "I apologize, I made a mistake, I misspoke, I announced the wrong person, I'm wildly embarrassed. It's actually not Miss X, it's Miss Y." Steve Harvey was raked over the coals for months, embarrassed on talk shows. People who were running for president said, if I were running, that never would have happened. And I thought it was one of the most beautiful demonstrations of humanity ever. I wrote an op-ed about it that was published, saying we should teach our children to be Steve Harvey. You see, Steve Harvey demonstrated for a moment for all of us the life we should aim to live. What is that life? It's a life where we can make a mistake and we own it. We don't deny it. We don't run around it. We don't make whataboutisms. We just call it out. We just say, it's on me. It's not on her. It's not because of him. It's not because of the weather. It's not because someone gave me the wrong card. The buck stops here. And since when do we have leaders, whether they are elected or they've risen to the moment, that we just allow them to do what they think is politically expedient and morally abhorrent. Why have we succumbed to this? And if all of us think that we're just part of the audience in a game, we're wrong. And I'll give you some examples of how we're wrong. If you were a person like me who was absolutely appalled at what happened in Charlottesville when people with tiki torches were marching and said they, referring to the Jews, they will not replace us. And you were appalled at the then President of the United States who said there were very good people on both sides, and who would not own that mistake of saying that statement, who doubled down and tripled down on that statement. But then you were able to say, when talking about the encampment on campus, look, there are some good kids out there. Look, there are some of them who have good intention. You traffic in hypocrisy, and you are part of the problem, not the solution. And I would tell you that if you are a person who has been appalled, embarrassed, frustrated, angered, enraged even, over the campus encampment, over the absolute abrogation of law and authority, about kids and people who aren't even kids taking over an institution, and it has bothered you so, but you've kind of downplayed and ignored January 6th and the insurrection in the Capitol, I will tell you that you are part of the problem, not a part of a solution. You're trafficking in that same hypocrisy and untruth. There was a member of this synagogue who in 2016, before the election, took me out to lunch with the sole purpose of trying to convince me to vote for a different party. And I won't be coy about any of the details because it won't serve us well. And the person of the synagogue said, how could we have a Clinton again in the White House after what Bill Clinton did that was so immoral and inappropriate in the Oval Office with Monica Lewinsky? It is disgusting. And then on October 7th, when the Access Hollywood tape came out, I called this same person trying to convince me. And the response was, what do I care about his personal life? That person is part of the problem, not the solution. That hypocrisy is the sibling of dishonesty and untruth. And it is morally corroding our world. It is the source, in my estimation, the source of what has led to the disintegration of our moral code in this country. And it must stop. And I say the following sentence I'm about to say to you in both the literal and the figurative sense. When a woman has been raped brutally, against her will, of course, and she has tried valiantly to fight off her attacker, and the authorities are then standing around and saying, did you punch him? Did you hit him? Well, that might be assault if you did. Is a level of ridiculousness that I can't even begin to comprehend. If you gouged his eyes, then shame on you for blinding him. That's the very question, the very behavior that's being addressed in the international world opinion today about Israel. That's exactly what's happening. And yesterday, when the United Nations took a vote, a straw poll equivalency of statehood for the Palestinians, it never received more votes than now. Telling us what? Telling us that terror has a reward. Telling us that embezzling funds has a reward. Telling us that holding hostages, that some are American, some are babies, and some are children with no proofs of life, has a reward. Telling us that defending the only Jewish state in the world is a crime. Where are we, people? What happened? I can't believe it's true. I'm pinching myself. And there's no one more to blame on one side or the other. We must call balls and strikes on every single one of the people who are trafficking in these immoral behaviors and these untruths and these dishonesties. If we have any prayer whatsoever of righting the ship and setting a proper course for our children to inherit. Because if we don't, what I'm afraid of, in both a spiritual and practical way, is that the act of God during the time of Noah and during the time of Sodom is going to fall upon us because of the lack of people who had the temerity to not only demonstrate morality, but to be honest, to be truthful, and to be right, even when it hurts. God, I hope we find that temerity.